Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the SE Gaming Business Forum. It is my pleasure to host this panel and to moderate this discussion between the exceptional professionals in our industry. I'm sure most of you may already know them, but allow me anyway to introduce them. I have a great pleasure to host today the representative of one of the most reputable gaming authorities in Europe, Malta Gaming Authority, Head of International Affairs and Policy. Welcome, Yanica, and thanks for being with us. Yanica Sant is with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then my dear colleague, German gaming lawyer, who is now the Chief Risk Officer and Head of Legal and Compliance at Push Gaming, Jessica Meyer. Hi, Jessica, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Milica.
Then we have Martin Lycka, GVC Senior Vice President for American Regulatory Affairs and Responsible Gambling. I believe all of you know him well. Welcome, Martin, and thanks for being with us today.
Hello, dobar dan. Thanks for having me.
Dobar dan. Yes, one of the things important to know about Martin is that he speaks like 8 or 9 foreign languages. So that's impressive.
I speak Czech very well, so that helps with Serbian.
Yeah. We have another representative of the operator. It's Batson Group, and Greta Agius, Head of Regulatory Affairs. Hello, Greta. It's our pleasure to have you today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Last but not least, someone who is coming from my home country, and I'm very grateful to have him today on our panel, Minja Bolesniko. He's a former CEO of the MaxBet Group. For those who don't know, MaxBet Group is one of the leading operators in Serbia and one of the biggest operators in Serbia in both land-based and online spaces. I will also thank you, Minja. Thank you for being with us. I would also like to invite you all to share more information about your experiences and biographies in the opening comments. But I will start now with just introducing us to our topic today, which is basically talking about the different regulations in the different countries, and to try to mention those which are a great example in the industry, and to also touch bases on the challenges of those who are still reviewing and changing the legislation, and maybe we will give some good advices to those policy makers today. We're starting from the regulatory overview of the SE markets. We are facing lots of changes and the different legislative landscape in the SE region. From a complete ban on all forms of gambling in certain markets to the full liberalization in others. Although most of the markets are regulated, some are still not able to fully materialize their potential, and there are certain reasons that we spotted which may be the issue there, and predominantly we see it's due to the legislative frameworks which are or do not follow the frequent technology changes, the lack of control and supervision mechanisms, and the low sanctioning rates of illicit gambling or gray operators. So I think we have a great speaker to start this panel, coming from one of the most modern jurisdictions. Saying modern because Malta is one of the countries decided to follow the technology challenges and technology revolutions. What can we learn from the Maltese model, and how has Malta created one of the largest markets in the gaming industry? Yanica, can you share a brief us in that regard?
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I think the main reason for that would be that Malta was one of the first countries, it was the first in Europe actually, to regulate online gambling. I mean, we started back in 2001. At the time, the law back then was very skeletal. It wasn't as technical and as specific as it is today. But it was definitely good groundwork to start the industry, to start regulating the industry, and to make sure that our objectives, which have remained the same over time, that is to keep gambling safe, fair, and free from crime, to keep players protected. We wanted to make sure that those objectives were achieved, and so at the time that law was sufficient. We realized soon after, as the industry started to evolve, as other countries in Europe particularly started to regulate, that there was a need to improve upon that legislation. I think that is one of the key factors in making sure that a jurisdiction remains up to date and remains valid and has a viable framework, is to listen and to feel what the industry is going through, and not just to remain static and not to be receptive to those changes. Anyway, Malta as a country then in 2018 came up with procedures, new compliance, new renewed and emphasized focus on player protection. With it, as a matter of coincidence, perhaps came the fourth anti-money laundering directive from Europe, and so even there we saw a revamp of our AML requirements. And so we also thought that it was a very good time in the legislative process to also focus more on technology. So we have what we call a technologically neutral legislation, so that any technology that our licensed operators would like to introduce would automatically fit in the legislative framework. It is our policies and procedures that need to perhaps react to this change in technology, as long as that technology furthers our objectives, in the sense that as long as that technology helps keep operators making sure that the game is safe, fair, and free from crime, then that technology should be welcomed. Technology is not an enemy to regulation. We shouldn't look at it conservatively. If technology can help improve an operator's processes and also our own, because I believe that regulators should equally embrace technology. It shouldn't only be the operators embracing technology. As long as it is used in that manner, then it should be welcomed, it should be harnessed, and operators everywhere should make sure that this technology helps further our objectives.
Thank you, Greta. This is the great message, especially for the SE region, where we still have the regulation, where the labs want to touch the servers to see where they are, not recognizing the cloud, and so on and so on. And I may say, if I may say, Malta did a great job, especially speaking from previously from the B2C side, and all those different licenses and types and classes of licenses, and now they're streamlined. There are business to business and business to consumer licenses, and basically everyone fits in. I think you did a great job. And one point which I find very important here and unique is that you started the online platform, which is basically unified self-exclusion project. Can you tell us more about this? Because I think this is something that is definitely needed, speaking about the self-exclusion issues, and then allowing customer to self-exclude himself, but then only on one website. And we know that the customers have accounts in more than one registered accounts in more than one operators, so they may decide to self-exclude themselves today from MaxBet, but then they still can play at Betson's website. So can you please share more information about that?
Yep, this is admittedly a deficiency in our systems, because while all our land-based outlets are integrated into one list, one platform, so to speak, so that any person who is excluded from one land-based outlet is automatically excluded from all the others. The same is not for online. So we embarked on a project to try and address this issue. However, we are unfortunately running into obvious challenges, and the challenges come across for various reasons, but I think that the most obvious is the fact that people on playing with our licensees, registered with our licensees, come from various jurisdictions, and they are not only limited to being Maltese players. And because of that, there are issues related to identification, issues related to how large the database is, but it is still a project that is active. It is still something that we are working on, and it is still something that we recognize as a deficiency in our legislation. There is a gap in the level of protection that we can afford to consumers, and we are actively trying to address it. I do hope that we are one day able to address this problem, and that anyone who excludes from one website is automatically excluded from all other websites for the purpose of a player's safety.
Thank you, Yanica. It's a great initiative. What have we learned from some other markets? One would say Germany, as a leading country in the European Union, will have the most modern solutions, Jessica. And finally, 16 regions in Germany have agreed to have to regulate the online gambling space, and we will have from the 1st of July 2021 we will have the fully regulated market in Germany, or is it? And what is your view on the changes and the new law?
Yes, we have agreement between the states. At least there was agreement in March to actually sort of introduce this new regulation in July next year. And in the meantime, a transitional regime was introduced as well. It wasn't an easy process for those 16 states to come together. There are very different views on how gambling should be regulated, if that should continue to be prohibited as it was, or if everything should be licensable, how flexible regulation should be, how adaptable to exactly sort of changes that Yanica mentioned. We're in an industry that is highly tech-driven, constant innovation. So you'd think it would make sense to look at, let's find a framework that is adaptable to these changes that we know will happen sort of down the line. But because I think the debate in Germany was quite an emotional debate between the states, and it wasn't sort of possible to talk sort of about this, say, more longer term, how can we actually create and shape the regulation that it is, for example, adaptable. I would say it is minimalist in what it has achieved, but it is of course great that there is this movement towards actually the licensing and away from the ban. But there is a very obvious lack of under-researched restrictions that have been introduced. There's just not enough evidence to actually show, are all those rules and provisions based on anything, or is that the result of just concerns that haven't been properly researched and looked at? And that leads to the question, will this new regulation actually achieve its goal of protecting players, channeling the market to sort of licensed operations? Will that actually work? And I think there is a tendency, if restrictions aren't properly sort of research and evidence based, there is a risk that regulation won't work because the players won't accept it, and they will find other ways to play, and the channelization goal then just is difficult to meet. We'll have to see what happens, but I think it will be challenging for the new German regulation, also because it hasn't been sort of drafted in a very adaptable way.
And what do you think? Why is that? Well, you were mentioning there was not enough research. We know that Germany has resources, great experts. Were they not consulting the operators? Was there no open discussion about the law proposal? So what was the reason behind?
Yes, I think obviously sort of it's never easy to get 16 different views together. So there's a lot of discussion, of course, that has gone on between the states. But I do believe it would have been great if the industry, if there had been a consultation, if there had been more interaction with other regulators to share experiences, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what is really sort of what should be a focus, what shouldn't be. I'm optimistic that will happen sort of down the line, and that there will be a more engaging and cooperative approach, and to share these experiences and also the data and research that might be needed. And that's, I think, where the industry can come in, and of course other regulators. Actually, even within Germany, right, there was a regulator, or is a regulator in Schleswig-Holstein. We have a state that has experience with online gaming regulation. They, of course, were involved in those discussions, but the regulation as it's looking like that we'll see in 2021 incorporate some of these experiences, certainly, but I wonder how much impact they did have in the discussions.
Thank you, Jessica. This is exactly what I wanted to ask you. Did they ask Schleswig-Holstein for their experiences? I remember all of us rushing to get those licenses at the time.
Yes.
I mean, speaking from the operator side at the time. Martin, what do you say? So you are representing GVC Group. You have licenses in 20 plus markets. You have interests everywhere. What are those main pillars of the well-balanced regulatory framework? Do you see it happening somewhere where will you like to make a combination of few markets and make a perfect combination?
I'm not sure about a perfect combination, but we would certainly be militating in favor of workable regulations that are not out of kilter with the market reality. So good morning again, everybody. Thanks for having me. And I do believe that all three of you that have had the chance to share views with the audience so far touched upon several critical points. Indeed, Malta since 2001 has been the trailblazer in this space, and we have, as an operator, and I believe the wider industry group has welcomed all the initiatives that the Maltese regulator has taken lately to indeed make sure that the Maltese regulation is not out of step with the technological and other developments within the industry, because that's one of the critical points that I believe we do need to be discussing about not only today, because regulation, in my view, simply cannot be effective or efficient, if you will, if it does not reflect the reality in the market, both prior to a jurisdiction having regulated and also throughout the life cycle of any regulation. Hand in hand, I would suggest with this issue goes the issue of the black market and how restrictive or liberal regulations are or might be. Because from my personal perspective, and also representing an operator, we have no issues with strict regulations as long as they're sensible. We've just talked about pre-legislation or pre-regulation research. That indeed is of cardinal importance to the rate of success of any regulation. So I do think that it's advisable to find out the lie of the land, so to speak, prior to the regulation, and give the operators, but not only the operators, the other stakeholders in the space, be it third-party gaming software providers, be it payments providers, these days, even the banks, because the banks have a significant role to play, not only on the payment side of things, but ever more so in connection with customer affordability. So yeah, I would advise for a need to consult with the industry and other stakeholders. Going back to the initial theme and to try to answer your question, I'm indeed not entirely sure whether there's a perfect piece of regulation. And I don't even think that we would need a perfect piece of regulation. We need regulation that ticks the boxes that we've been discussing on this panel and critically makes sure that as an industry, we continue providing entertaining, also responsible, safe and sustainable experience to our customers.
And thank you for actually remembering and mentioning banks. I think we should talk about that more, especially knowing that banks are actually a big part of the licensing proceedings when the requirements are bank guarantees or cash deposits, and then when you have in certain markets banks or majority of the banks not being friendly to the gambling operators, and that's one of the preconditions for the license, then the question is that market actually regulated? There are the requirements, there is a gaming board in place, you are able to fulfill all of them except for one, and then it stops entire business from going forward. And yeah, this is definitely something I think the banks together with the regulators will also would be good if they could listen more to the industry and to the bright side of the industry, not only to look at us from the red flag kind of a mode. And what do you think, Greta, about what our colleagues have said before? From your experience, looking to the countries which have modernized their legislation and those which are in the process of newly regulating, do you think that they have achieved a workable balance, or they're imposing more compliance hurdles to the industry? We know that compliance costs money, so does it make sense to be more compliant? And what is your experience?
Yes, well, firstly, I have to agree with all the speakers before me. Just touching on what Yanica said, modernization of regulation in this industry is of course key, because you need to adapt to new challenges, new realities, and have a more robust framework. So looking at the MGA example as well as the other, let's say, first wave countries, if we call them, their adaptation there to the player protection rules, anti-money laundering and fraud, as well as, you know, the controls and supervision, the increase in controls and supervision, where of course definitely necessary in order to have this more robust framework. And you know, this is something which we generally welcome. I think then the question is, have we, in the process of modernizing and as well as in the process of newly regulating, have there been an increase in compliance requirements, and has there been sometimes a heavy-handed approach taken? I think of course in some instances this has happened, right? I think compliance is, let's say, is necessary. Well, we can call it a necessary evil, right? But I think it's also important, provided it, you know, it meets, you know, the necessary requirements, provided it's adaptable, it is flexible, and just like the regulatory process, it also needs to be, let's say, evidence-based. I think the challenge is when you're a multi-licensed operator like Betsson, as well as operating with you know, various brands. I think the challenge is that when you operate across countries, we have sometimes divergent requirements, even though the same goals, let's say, and public interest requirements need to be reached, because there's an absence of harmonization and standardization, even if we look at within the EU, and even where we do have a certain amount of harmonization, like AML and fraud, which falls under the anti-money laundering directive. But when it comes to, for example, filing an STR, a suspicious transition report, there we don't have a harmonized form in doing it. So these are all, you know, challenges which we have as operators. But another, just moving on to another point which was touched upon by Jessica as well as Martin, in terms of the regulatory process, we have seen, you know, a wave of restrictions coming in, even due to the COVID pandemic, and I think, as well as, you know, in markets which are newly regulating, they, you know, having certain regulatory requirements in place, which sometimes you question their adaptability or their flexibility, or whether they are even evidence-based. And this is perhaps the most important, that we work in a sector, we work in a regulatory environment which is evidence-based and which does address the market's realities, because not only do you need operators to be interested in a market and to stay on a market, but also because you want to channel consumers to the regulated offer at the end of the day. And this is why balance in the regulatory process is key.
I completely agree with you, especially with the last part. We're saying the governments need to regulate the market in order to protect the customers. Customers are there, they're only on the different platforms. The fact that the market isn't regulated or the gambling isn't allowed, it doesn't mean that the customers are not there. They're just not on the right channels. They're not on the right platforms, and they're not protected. Moving slowly to the SEE countries and to the point that we would like to make here, maybe to attract and invite the foreign investors to come to the SEE countries. Minja, I think you're the right person to start with this topic and to tell us, what do you think, how the SEE countries can attract new players to the gaming industry?
Thank you very much, Milica. Well, before I start, let me just make a brief introduction about my role at this panel. As you rightfully said, I'm a former CEO of MaxBet, but I'm still external consultant for their businesses in entire region. MaxBet's present not only in Serbia, but also in Montenegro, Bosnia, Republika Srpska, and North Macedonia. And by being present in all these countries, we do see different types of regulations. We see over-regulated markets, we see under-regulated markets, and as all the colleagues rightfully said, we do need a certain extent, not certain, but safe, and I just love what Yanica said, safe, fair, and free of crime market, because then it comes to our business abilities to prove ourselves worthy of the clients and customers we have. And MaxBet's all about that. MaxBet's all about technology, all about improvements, about new standards, etc., etc. So we really looked forward to the new legislation in Serbia. We are very grateful for having people such as Mr. Gašić run regulatory body in Serbia. And why is that? Because for the first time in the history of the gaming industry in the region, we have somebody who deeply understands on an expert level entire business, understands what capital is, where it wants to move, why it wants to go there, and somebody who's looking in for a partnership, obviously trying to reach certain goals, such as increase in government incomes, etc., etc. And on the other hand, making the environment more safe. And when it comes to the technology, I see that MaxBet is a different sort of player than all the other contestants at the market in terms of really hoping to have this clear picture of who is playing, where we're playing, what we're playing at, and if there are issues and problems that we're able to jointly solve those. Don't forget that all of us, we prefer to live from entertainers rather than those who have issues. We've all been speaking about that, but obviously there's huge gap in some other markets in the region. For example, in Montenegro, you have a lovely legislation that's not being fully understood by the authority itself. We have people who are not able to make decisions because they have not been fully selected as the regulatory body. Online as an issue as well, in terms of understanding where the income's coming from, who is able to be an operator, to be a so-called operator, or we have colleagues from abroad who are still offering certain services and products in the regions where they're not supposed to, although their domestic license are not really giving them that as a chance. And on the other hand, COVID also helped us understand why the legislation is important, what can be done and what's fair to be done in order to have the business up and running and remain all those thousands and thousands of jobs in the business and in the industry. Maxbet alone has over 3,000 employees in Serbia, and plus some 1,000 in other countries. So obviously, we are heavily dependent, or the company is heavily dependent on their both land-based and online results. And please try to understand that the markets here are not as advanced as the Western ones. So players are still not fully buying in the online, the sports, etc., etc. So land-based business is really, really important in that sense. And by saying all this, I just wanted colleagues to have the entire overview of where we are at the point. And now we have the law. We are.
Minya, sorry for interrupting you.
Sure.
We will come to the question and more specific. We will talk more specifically about Serbia in the end of this conversation. Just to remind you of the question, you answered pretty much all of it, but in 3 words, what will you say as a main advantages of investing in SE markets? How will you invite the foreign investors to come, and why? If you can choose the main aspects which are beneficial for them.
It's very simple. First of all, SE is a region that has become regulated. Second of all, economically, it's getting developed, and it's a land of chances, a land of opportunities. And finally, there is a huge culture of people enjoying the benefits of games of chance or sports betting or casino gaming and gaming in general. So this is part of our DNA. So it would be easy to come and, if you understand the player, to offer the right things. Thank you.
Thank you, Minya. Martin, did Minya convince you? How do you guys look at the Balkan region, and do you see interest in that region, and where exactly? I've mentioned before, I saw that one presence of GVC recently in Serbia through the sponsorship of the tennis tournament of Janko Tipsarević tennis tournament. Despite the difficulties Novak Djokovic had, that was a brave move, first of all. Well done for it, and thank you. And then speaking about some real opportunities from the gambling and your business perspective, was that a little step to our market, or what was that about?
Well, first of all, Minya has been very convincing, just like Janko has been, and that's why we started working with him and the Janko Tipsarević Tennis Academy. It was a charitable project from our perspective, and definitely during the pandemic, in my view, it was the right thing to do, to support a great cause. And Janko in particular, but together with his team, has moved heaven and earth to make it happen, despite indeed some of the odds that you have just, and adversity you have just alluded to. In terms of the wider market, I believe that this is a two-way traffic opportunity, and I will seek to explain myself. Minya has talked about the Balkan countries being in the throes of regulating their markets in one way or another, and that is certainly a step in the right direction. Plus, there are a lot of people out there who adore the likes of football, basketball, and other sports. So that's probably, or that's an excellent starting point. An assumption can be made that there is a lot of room for maneuver when it comes to betting and finding new customers. The reason I said that this is a two-way traffic opportunity, Jessica in particular, together with Greta, I suppose all of us at least to some extent have talked about the ongoing changes to gambling regulation worldwide. And indeed, businesses such as GVCs, but many others, do need to be thinking, and believe you me that all these businesses are already thinking about pastures new, in particular, multi-channel opportunities. Minya touched upon the interplay between the land-based or retail industry, if you will, and the digital or online industry. And I believe that that's where the future lies, the combination of the two. And there are a number of opportunities how this can be structured, plus combined with a very, very strong geographical mix at the end of the big global facing operators. So cut a long story short, indeed, the Balkans is a region that is definitely of interest to the global gambling industry, in my view.
Thank you, Martin, and you're welcome to come. We are waiting. we are happy to have you, especially in Serbia. And Jessica, tell us from the business-to-business provider point of view, and not only the operator's perspective. What should the SEE policymakers do to attract your business?
Talk to each other, talk to us, talk to the industry, keep those talks going. Generally, talk to and the SEE. I mean, we have a very sort of interesting mix of countries in there. That some with quite a long experience in regulating gambling, and then other countries where this is more of a new concept. But I think, again, going back to sort of researching what makes sense, talking to each other, getting the experience, getting the actually the data that helps shape the regulation in the way that it can then work to attract the business to the region, and more importantly, to actually sort of achieve the player protection goal and the channelization goal at the same time. I do think it always comes back to that. And it's always interesting when you see that move from a ban to liberalization to licensing, and how this can be done, and to be a part in shaping those discussions. That is of interest to us.
Thank you, Jessica, and I completely agree. As you said, I think we all mentioned many times that player protection is in the center of this topic, of this issue, and as Mina mentioned, no one needs and no operator wants to have the gambling problem customer that doesn't benefit anyone. Going forward with our discussion, unfortunately, we cannot continue without mentioning coronavirus impact. What is the current situation in the EU and other member states post-pandemic? We know that quite a few changes have happened, mostly due to the COVID crisis. A number of pandemic-motivated restrictions, from restrictions on gambling-related advertising to temporarily suspending gambling licenses in certain jurisdictions. Who would like to start with this painful topic? I know that Betson had issues in Spain because of the correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to the gambling-related advertising restrictions. Greta, did Betson have feel or definitely have some sort of impact of the coronavirus, and where, if you can share your experience with us?
Yes, well, of course, as soon as the coronavirus broke out, we saw a number of member states taking a more restrictive approach when it came to advertising, as you rightly mentioned, Spain. And we saw a wave of, let's say, at least under the EU structure, any type of, legislation whereby you were amending your gambling legislation needs to be notified to the European Commission. And in some cases, some member states even invoked the emergency procedure. And in some cases, that legislation had already been discussed before, and the coronavirus was, let's say, used as a way of using the emergency procedure for it to go right through the channels. So I think this was one of our biggest challenges in the process of seeing restrictions come about due to Corona, but others were already in the process. There was already the draft law, it was already being discussed, and let's say the virus was used in order to, to push things through in the easy way. What we do see, even from research coming out now, because there was this whole huge panic that suddenly we're going to have a high increase of high intensity problem gambling during the pandemic. But if you look at research recently published in Sweden, there was a report published just on the 29th September in Frontiers in Public Health, which found no evidence of a significant increase in high intensity gambling and problem gambling during the pandemic. So what we always say is you need to take an evidence-based approach to regulation, because if you don't, the risk is that consumers will just go to black market operators, which will not have the same the same restrictions, not need to abide by the same restrictions. And it's the same with advertising now. Advertising is the only way operators can show that they are a licensed operator within the industry, and not being able to do that obviously helps push consumers to the black market operators.
Yanica, how did you react? How from the regulator's side? So how do you prevent this from happening, and how do you balance the complete ban and prevention? So what did you do? What did MGA do in this COVID times?
Yeah, this was a tricky point. I think one of the trickiest points in our history of regulation, because what to do in such a circumstance like a global pandemic, especially when you have a global consumer base, so to speak, because our players are pretty much global, was very tricky. On the one hand, of course, we did recognize that at that point in time, players who are vulnerable because either they are at risk of developing a gambling problem or have already developed one, are probably going to be even more at risk, because suddenly while we usually tell players, not to play at home or not to play while they're alone, all of a sudden there are health authorities around the world telling players to stay at home alone. So telling everyone to stay at home alone, but of course that includes players. So there was this evident problem at that point. On the other hand, exactly as Greta said, we were at risk of stopping licensed operators from advertising, yes, and then players who have perhaps never played before and are suddenly at home and want to play, or players who used to play and want to find someone else to play with, are not easily informed of those operators that are licensed, regulated, and safe, and are acting out the objectives of the regulator. So I think you have to strike a balance. What we tried to prevent, our approach was, we tried to prevent aggressive advertising, and advertising that exploited the fact that there was a pandemic. So at its peak, so say March, April, which was probably the first peak of the pandemic, where we even had sports events being cancelled. And so all of a sudden you had players who used to play on sports events who might be looking for something else to play on, might be looking for a sport they are not familiar with, might be looking to switch to online casino, for example, perhaps. All of a sudden you had players who are at risk of becoming even more vulnerable and looking for something to do in that sense. So we said, anyone who exploits the fact that there is a pandemic, so even something as simple as bored at home, play with us, for example, that would have been considered as aggressive. And so we were stopping and fining a lot of these adverts. I must say that most operators were very sensible. We had operators who were planning on issuing an advertising campaign before COVID hit, and thought, well, this might not be that responsible now that there is COVID, because there's reference to being at home and playing, and now that might seem as though we are doing it because there's COVID. So we had these operators who actually took a step back. There were operators who didn't and who tried to exploit. I think that this was mostly common with the smaller operators, understandably so in a sense, because they had just lost a portion of their market, probably because of sports betting, and they needed to try and survive, so to speak. But it was not acceptable. I mean, at that point, we took a choice, and we chose the safety of consumers. But the channelization, I must say, I agree with Jessica and Martin and Minia. Channelization is also player protection. If you channel players to a regulated environment, that is keeping them safe. So we need to, operators and legislators everywhere need to remember that the importance of channelization and the importance of making sure that regulated operators do get their space to advertise their products, as long as that advertising is done in a safe and unaggressive way.
Yeah, as you said, and I think this is 100% operators' responsibility to act responsible. We all know what is sensible. We all know, and no one can say that someone from the marketing department didn't feel that it's not, it's okay to send a message, play with us while you're struggling in lockdown. And unfortunately, we saw those promotions in Serbia and SE region at the beginning of the COVID, where some of the operators were informing about the COVID situation, giving them advices to take care of their health, but at the same time promoting their bonuses in the same message. What do you say, Martin? We are now in a second, third wave. We don't know, are we going to start surfing in a fourth? How is it going to continue? But too draconic regulations don't work. Again, balance. Do we need to invite operators to act responsibly and not to wait for the regulators to react? What did you do on a GVC side? How did you protect the players?
Well, definitely, when the first very unfortunate wave popped by, we further upped the ante in terms of our responsible gambling tools, protocols, and processes. Added additional display messages on the side, further cut down on the advertising, indeed avoiding, if you excuse my French, some of the stupid and gross and very, very unhelpful messages that indeed a minority of operators still sought to convey, sort of piggybacking of a very, very tragic and unfortunate situation that has developed at that point. So indeed, it came down to finding the balance to make sure that we continue offering a sufficiently attractive product to make sure customers indeed stay within the fold of the regulated market, or play with the regulated operators and do not wander off to the black market, while making sure that customers are not being exploited, because indeed for many people it might have been a brand new situation, a brand new experience. Most of us perhaps not anymore, but at least prior to pandemic, we were accustomed to a certain routine: get up in the morning, go to work, and then all of a sudden we were forced to hunker down in our houses. And indeed, that is associated with potential boredom and looking for ways out of that boredom. And gambling may be one of them. So that's why operators, not only GVC, many others, a large majority of them, as Yanica has pointed out, sought to find, and in my view did find, ways of stepping up their consumer protection efforts to make sure that customers can play safely.
Thank you, Martin. Minia, tell us about your experience and how has your former employer dealt with during the COVID impact. I know that the retail shops were closed during the lockdown, and that has impacted your business and other gaming businesses in Serbia and the region. On the other hand, speaking about the measures in terms of protecting customers during these tough times, I noticed something very unusual in Serbia. One will say a quick adjustment to the change. One will say, was it really responsible to do? We had some countries have food delivery. We had a betting shop delivery. So a person will come to the house door of the customer and help them place their bet. what do you think about that? And do you think this is something that should continue in the event that that the land-based closes now? Do you think that was something that we should, and is what's your view on that?
Thank you. Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, Serbia and SE as markets are heavily dependent on the land-based activity, on the retail shops activity. And when shops were closed, obviously, some did better than the others. And that's due to the fact that certain companies, such as MaxBet, being the largest content provider within the online world in SEE, did find a way. So not only with pandemic, but much before that, somewhere in September of 2018, MaxBet did decide to heavily push on online and to onboard players, and they've been very successful in that, not only in understanding what players want and offering the content, but also in communication with the players. So when pandemic hit, one thing is that there was a content that was offered, although there were no sporting events. There were virtuals, there was casino, there was esports, although esports is a big question mark for SE markets due to the fact that I'm not really sure that people within the companies do understand the importance of and future development of esports as being such a important part of the new revenue stream being formed. On the other hand, I have to brag about this. MaxBet did an awesome thing. They've partnered up with a chain of retail stores offering top-ups for mobile providers, where you were, as a customer, able to top up your online credit without having somebody come to your door, deliver food, vouchers, whatever, and really have that within the law frame, which offers this possibility. People, I think, need to read the laws more carefully about what's really out there and how many wonderful opportunities there are. We are sometimes stubborn and we like to do things the old way, and this needs to change. MaxBet found that out in the right time. Also, another thing, being conscious of the finance buffers, and cash was the king in the COVID time. And that's why we overcame the situation quite nicely. Obviously, everybody was hit. That's no argue there. But those who did their planning properly did obviously better than the others. Communication with the players, and I'm not talking now about the advertisements and whatever, but I've seen bigger increase, bigger understanding of your support teams, your VIP teams, doing much bigger role, or let's say coming to the much bigger stage light than they had in the past. So now I think that companies will invest in that segment in the future in order to maintain their players for any future lockdowns.
Thank you, Minja.
Sure.
We spoke about the gambling protection during the COVID times. I think something that is very important that has happened and very positive in this region is that the customers have shifted to the online. They started using more, I would say, safe methods, especially in this region where the online operators are subject to the AML laws and KYC procedures. More restrictive than land-based, and I think more customers we have online, we will have a safer market, I will say, and a safer environment, because no transaction can go without the KYC checks. No,
I'm sorry. Can I just drop in a couple of more sentences? You're so right, and that's also one of the key points for new players to come in here. market of players has not been exploited to the fullest, not even close. The usage of bank cards, credit cards, debit cards is still not peaked. It's far away from that. So there's still a lot of room for the improvement for the KYC, etc. etc. A lot of operators still have not implemented any sort of software tools to onboard players properly through KYC while offering a smooth ride in the process. And that's why I'm saying I think that MaxBet group as a group with sponsoring this event wanted to send this message that, hey, we're out there, we want a fair and square market, and let's fight through the knowledge, through the services, through the offer. And also I have to mention another sponsor here is Blinking. And
Minya, thank you
sure.
very much. Let the Blinking promote themselves.
Sure.
I would just I'm sorry to say that Martin is not with us anymore.
Yeah, I see that.
I hope he will join. We have a few more minutes left, and one more topic which we have gone through already, but just to mention because that was one of the triggers for this conference, is the new law in Serbia. And the Minja already mentioned the big effort that the New Games of Chance Authority has put into this changes and into the regulating Serbian market, and actually helping local operators keep the customers on their platforms, which is something that no one has been able to do so far. We had issues and still have issues with those operators, big operators, global operators who are present in Serbia through their .coms, even though Serbia is a regulated market. I would like to just hear your view, and MGA, from the MGA side, Jessica from your side, being a German lawyer, seeing .com operators trying to now shift them to this regulated regime. We spoke about exploiting the customers if they are not betting on the safe and regulated platforms, and also there is a big part there which is protecting the local operators from those who are not paying taxes, not going through any of those that hassle that they went through in order to get licensed. And of course there is a tax point, and something that is very important for the government. Government wants to keep the taxes in their budget and not to have them all over the place in a different actually no one is paying those taxes then on those .com. So I will start with you, Yanica. How will you advise, being so experienced, coming from one of the most reputable gaming authorities, how will you advise the Serbian gaming authority to combat with the operators which are still acting gray in a regulated market?
Sorry for that, I was muted. I think that Jessica mentioned this before. I think the best thing for regulators to do is to speak among themselves. And this goes for regulators no matter where they are. And we look forward to the possibility of being able to cooperate and to share best practices, to share information with the regulators in these regions too. We are genuinely excited about this, especially as the online market appears to be growing ever more so. I would say that it depends very much on the type of operators that there are in this region and the type of operators they want to attract to this region. And I would, as coming from the Maltese regulator, I would sum it up in one single sentence. I think that the most important thing as a foundation for a licensing framework is to recognize the regulatory framework of another jurisdiction. Mostly because there are other jurisdictions like us and like other jurisdictions anyway, that do have a sound and comprehensive regulatory framework. And not just learning from it, but also recognizing that framework and that license is something that we would always advocate.
Thank you, Yanica. We will receive this as your initiative for the bilateral cooperation between our two authorities, MGA and Serbia Gaming Authority, and we are looking forward to learning more from your experience. And Jessica, tell us, what's your views there?
Yeah, I mean, sort of speaking from a supplier perspective, of course, these talks, and we've touched about on it already. It just sort of leads to more harmonization between it, which makes it a lot easier. So mostly B2Bs can't hold their own licenses, but will be sort of looped in through technical standards and certification programs. And of course, the more those differ from place to place, the more cost intense it is, and the more time it takes to sort of figure out what is different, and sort of performing these gap analysis of what is required where, which is fine to do, and is what we're doing. But of course, the more harmonization there is, and the more discussion there is on what is the best practice here, or what being open to improvements to systems that have come up with through sort of this dialogue with other regulators, I think is really helpful, because that can lead. I'm not saying I don't foresee harmonization in that regard in any time soon. That's just because at the end of the day, it is a very it will always be the country or the jurisdiction in question that will decide how it has to regulate gambling for its own country, and so there will always be different opinions there. So I don't expecting this completely harmonized gambling framework, but the open dialogue is just really important.
I agree, and I have to say I'm very sorry that our dialogue needs to finish here. I'm very grateful for having you all. I think this was a great panel. I mean, at least you were the great panelists and speakers. It was my pleasure to moderate this, and I hope to see you in some other conference soon. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Milica.
Thank you. Bye.